Hello, everybody, and welcome to our bonus Q&A episode of The X-Files with me, Christiane Amanpour, and Jamie Rubin. This is, as you know, where we answer your questions, and we really try to get to the heart of the matter, what really interests you. Let's get started then this week. Jamie, I am going to ask the first question because I think it's a good one for you to answer on that side of the pond. So, Eliza on Instagram. What are your thoughts on the No Kings protest at the weekend, especially in light of Trump's grotesque video where he's wearing a crown? Why isn't there more uproar about how he sees himself as a king?
It's a very good question. I think it came up in our discussion of Venezuela. I do think this is something that may finally move Americans. We are a democracy. It's a democracy that's under threat and strain right now because President Trump is exploiting every avenue he can to turn the presidency into an authoritarian system where he can use ICE as his militia, where he can use the courts or ignore the courts when he wants to, where Congress has just turned itself into his lapdogs on many occasions. And so the idea of no kings, I think, is a very smart slogan. And in our country this past weekend, there were protests all over the country. Small towns and big cities, huge numbers of people came out because this is a theme that is the cause of the American Revolution. When King George III tried to dictate taxes and other behaviors on the United States, we rebelled and revolted and created the world's first democracy. So if Americans cannot care enough about their own democracy to respond to Donald Trump's attempts to thwart that democracy through the behaviors that we've talked about, then we're going to go downhill
Mhm.
fast. So I believe there is pushback in the courts. Increasingly, the courts are standing up to Donald Trump. I think people have to. I would put the slogan with alongside "No Kings" is "No fear." If
Mhm.
Americans are not afraid of the Trump administration, they will behave and act and do things that will prevent Trump from succeeding. So he does behave like a king. He wants to remake the White House into his own version of a royal, palace with gold everywhere,
The
um, and
ballroom.
and a ballroom, and all the behaviors are the behaviors of I would call it more like a don of a mafia family than the king of an empire, but nevertheless, the idea is the same.
Yeah.
And so
When he's
no
got his
king
face on a piece of the currency, the cryptocurrency,
exactly.
just the king and queen motif is very front and center here in Europe right now. Prince Andrew, who's no longer allowed to use any of his titles, the second
Except for
son of Queen.
Prince.
Yeah, but not HRH because
Right.
of his horrendous record of contact with Jeffrey Epstein. Not to mention everything else about that, really horrendous. He denies all the charges, but nonetheless, he's had contact with Jeffrey Epstein beyond what he said he had contact, and this is terrible. His victim, again, he denies it, has just published a book in the United States, Virginia Giuffre, about what she says was her horrendous experience, and one has to be with the victims. But this is, his own brother, the King of England, has told him to step aside. So it's a little bit sort of democracy coming to the royal family in a way. But also, Jamie, in France, somebody who we both know, Elaine Chelino, who wrote a phenomenal book about the Louvre, the great, museum there, the world's biggest, has just been talking about this daring heist, these people who went in and stole the crown jewels. And even though France is not a monarchy and it's a republic and has been, ever since Louis the 16th and Marie Antoinette, just about, um, it's 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 really, it's really knocked them for six there in France. Why I bring this up, I don't know. But you were talking about kings. All right, ask the next question.
This is from Annie on YouTube. What's going on with Assad? It's like he's completely disappeared since he fled to Russia at the end of last year. What do you think?
Well, I think he has completely disappeared. I hear various sources saying that he's trying to figure out how to, get Putin to give him some kind of role somewhere, somehow. He wants to, be still somebody, but he doesn't appear to be at all. It is very worrying, though, inside Syria. You've got this new president, acting interim president, Ahmad al Shara, who's saying the right things about democracy, who's saying the right things about trying to unify the country, but who was at the helm in the last most terrible sort of, bloodletting there, which was a couple of months ago when the Druze and others went against the Alawites, and there was a lot of killing, and that has raised questions about the future of Syria and the hold that the new president has on Syria, his ability to keep Syria from being fragmented, as also Israel is continuing to act and intervene militarily there. So, Assad has fled, Assad has left, Assad has been toppled. But, and he is sort of absent from the scene, but it's not clear at all yet what his legacy, finally will be in Syria, and what can be sort of recuperated and restored from his departure. We'll
I
see.
welcome this question for an unusual reason. Um, Syria and what happened in Syria, where 500,000 people were murdered and killed, men,
Hmm.
women, and children during their civil war. And most of the people of that country fled their homes either to move to another part of Syria or create much of the refugee crisis in Europe that has caused so much damage
Yes.
to the politics of Europe, the immigration damage that was done by the Syrian war. And this brings us back to something that's very painful to talk about, but is worth mentioning. Assad is back in the newspapers. The New York Times has done an enormous examination, 2, 3, 4 full pages over the last couple of days of all of the people who were responsible for the mass murder of innocent men, women, and children in Syria,
Yep.
500,000. And where have they gone? So it's not just Assad, but it's the hundreds of people that
Exactly.
enabled his regime. All of them should be tracked down. All of them should face justice. But here's where the weird part comes. I have to admit that under a Democratic president, Barack Obama, the United States stood idly by and let Assad do what he did to that country without acting, not even when President Obama threatened to use force over the issue of chemical weapons. He wouldn't carry through on the threat once Assad used chemical weapons. And that opened the door for Russia to come into Syria, and I believe opened the door in Putin's mind to some of the terrible actions he's done subsequently. Now, here's the weirder part. Donald Trump, he doesn't like the idea of big wars, but when Assad used for chemical weapons, he struck the Assad regime twice, and that enabled him to protect a group of people in Idlib in northern Syria when Assad and Putin wanted to go finish the job, and they didn't do it under the threat from Trump. And it's
Mhm.
those very people where al Shara was located with his group in Idlib, who ended up overthrowing the regime. Why am I saying all this long rap? Because Trump understood the power of the United States sometimes and used it more wisely in Syria than Barack Obama did. And Trump occasionally does the right thing. And when he does, I think it's in our interest to be truthful and lucid about it, even
Mhm.
if it's painful.
I know that you are literally fit to be tied because you raise it a lot about this red line. And certainly many around the world, probably the Russians, certainly in the Middle East, viewed it as a demonstration of American unwillingness to follow through, an American pulling back. However, I would point you to a very interesting chapter in the former Secretary General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg's new biography. It's called On My Watch. And he specifically talks about having conversations with Obama about that moment, and that he lays it out how Obama really did believe that force was right to be used then. And then it all collapsed when they decided to go to Congress for it.
No,
So,
he didn't. He chose. That's just Stoltenberg's just wrong. He did probably hear that from Obama, but Obama made this decision all by himself. He
Were
had
you
made the
okay?
threat. He could have acted.
y-
He chose to go to Congress specifically because he knew that Congress wouldn't support him. The rest of his team, John Kerry, Susan Rice, Leon Panetta, all the team who were part of the the Obama administration, recommended against going to Congress. Obama did exactly what he knew would happen, which is Congress didn't support it, and he was afraid of
His
another
chief of
Iraq
staff
war.
urged him to go to
That's
Congress,
right. Only Dennis
and
McDonough, who
then
didn't
and then the
didn't
Brits did the
tell him
same.
what would
Yeah,
happen if he
yeah.
didn't follow through, what the effect would be, because he was a junior league person who had never lived in the real world. He didn't
Who?
understand the danger.
Who?
Dennis McDonough. And that advice, when you're a chief of staff, you're supposed to give your boss the hard news, not the easy news. Obama wanted to hear that he could avoid using force. McDonough was supposed to say to him, look, Mr. President, I understand why you don't want to do this, and I appreciate that. But here are the facts. If you don't do it, here are the consequences in Asia, in the Middle East, in Europe, for all the leaders who rely upon the United States acting upon its commitments. Here are the downsides if you don't do it. And the truth was, it wasn't going to be a big deal. It was going to be a small cruise missile attack on Assad's military facilities. Trump did it twice. It wasn't a big deal or a terrible deal. It didn't
Okay.
matter that much. What mattered was not doing it.
All
That's
right. Well,
where the
listen, but the
danger
thing is,
came.
I will say one thing, and I'm not an American. I'm just playing devil's advocate. But we need to move on, frankly. That when Trump does stuff without Congress, everybody freaks out. You know, so there is that part of it too. In any event, next question, Karen on email. Can you please explain why so many people believe Trump will deserve the Nobel Peace Prize if the ceasefire is successful? If he does win, will this not validate all of the cruelty and suffering he's imposed on his own people?
Wow, this is a good question. Look, I know we spoke in our last episode about Trump and the Peace Prize, and I don't read all the comments all the time, but I did flip through them and I saw a lot of outrage at the idea that Donald Trump should ever get a Nobel Peace Prize. And I understand it. He's done untold damage to my country. I didn't vote for him. I want him to be out of office as soon as his term ends. I want the Republicans to be defeated at the polls. But when I look at the world and I say, what would make the world a better place? One of the things that would make the world a better place if Donald Trump took on seriously the job in Gaza, for example, and followed through on the peace agreement that he got, and followed through by empowering Tony Blair so that this ceasefire agreement doesn't collapse, by creating an international force, by creating a governing systems for Gaza, and by working towards a two-state solution. That will require enormous amounts of work from Donald Trump and his team. And if getting the Nobel Prize is the motivation for him doing that,
Okay.
fine. The idea of the Nobel Prize being so important is absurd. The goal should be to do the right thing, not because you're going to get a prize. And if this motivates Trump, fine with me. I ain't going to wear no MAGA hat, but I'm happy to accept that they give him a prize if he does the
Yeah.
hard work of keeping the peace in Gaza moving forward, in allowing for a two-state solution. That's something he hasn't been prepared to do. That's why the ceasefire is collapsing this
That's
week.
the real horrible fact of it. And it really upsets me about Trump. And I saw it when I covered his summits with Kim Jong un. And I heard it from the South Korean foreign minister that what could have been a success with a proper set of agreements between the two countries didn't, because Trump didn't follow up, said the former South Korean foreign minister to me. And now I am just horrified that within a week, literally a week, of Trump being in Israel and addressing the Knesset and the ceasefire and the release of the living hostages, etc., and the Palestinian prisoners, this thing appears to be crumbling. Let us hope that it does not, but it just goes to show how much sustained, focused attention the United States needs to keep on this prize. Right, Jamie, you ask the next question.
All right, you
I'm
ready for
ready.
this one? Donna on email. Would it ever be possible to try Trump at the ICC if the USA became a member?
Well, everything theoretically is possible, and other world leaders have been tried. The likelihood of the US becoming a member is precisely zero because of the reason that they don't want their leaders or their military ever indicted, and you'd have to have a real hard case. You'd have to have facts. You'd have a case. You'd have to have sort of a line of command, a command authority to even bring some kind of indictment. And right now, I can't really see it ever happening.
Yeah, let me just make a couple comments on that. Number one, International Criminal Court is a sound idea. It was pushed, I believe, during originally the Clinton administration. We signed the original legislation for that, but then over time the US pulled out precisely for the reasons you mentioned. But what I want to say about it is International Criminal Court is valuable when a domestic legal system
That's
isn't
right. That's
doing
what
its
it's for.
job. That's exactly what it's for. Right now, our domestic legal system, I believe, is trying
Yeah.
desperately to do its job. It's very difficult. It's very hard. The Court of Appeals keeps getting appealed from particular judges. That goes to the Supreme Court. And this whole system is slow and painful, and it takes a long time. But the system is working. What I worry about with the ICC is what happens when international lawyers and international justice goes astray. And that happens. I saw it in the case of the tribunal that was created for Kosovo. One of the original experts on Kosovo recently wrote a very powerful article in a newspaper about his visit to the Kosovo tribunal where he met with Mr. Thaci, and he'd been part of this process for 25 years. And he realized that that tribunal was supposed to be looking at one charge, which was this ridiculous charge that the KLA had been involved in organ trafficking, and they couldn't prove that. And so they did what was not envisaged by the original legislation, and they found other things to prosecute. And the reason I bring this up is because that tribunal has failed the cause of international justice. The purpose of international justice is to get accountability for the people who actually did crimes so that a group is not
Yeah.
blamed
Yeah.
for the crime, assigning individual responsibility and eliminating collective guilt. And instead of doing that, this tribunal is blaming the Kosovar Albanians as a group, essentially, the KLA as a group. It's a terrible assault on the
Yeah.
principle of international justice. And so what I bring this up because the international justice system has to be conducted by people who understand its proper role and don't see their own careers being advanced by prosecuting someone who doesn't deserve to be prosecuted, but it's good for
Yeah,
their
you've made
career.
that
And I
point
worry
many,
about that.
many times,
And I want to
and you
make it
probably
again.
make it
International
again.
justice is
And
suffering.
I feel bad for Hashim Thachi. And yeah, but I will also say, because I've covered them, whether it's Bosnia, whether it's Rwanda, whatever it might be, the war crimes tribunals as set up have
Does
done
work.
incredible work that leads to reconciliation through justice and eventually, hopefully,
Absolutely.
lasting peace. And I really also disdain when it goes rogue. You, in fact, me, I'm going to ask the next question because it's for you. Kirsty on Instagram. Jamie, do you think you're starting to Pavlov your own self into developing a cramp whenever the Middle East is discussed? I was wondering that too.
Well, it's a good question. Two times in a row, I think maybe even three times it happened. Today,
Thank
I have
God.
no cramps. Today, we haven't focused on the Middle East, but I think the funny thing is, I am 65, and as you get older, your body changes. I've been taking glucosamine, which is this medicine that's good for aging
Crikey.
muscles. And glucosamine has made a big difference. I don't have a cramp today when I exercise
Yeah, you
properly and
should
stretch
exercise more and
properly.
stretch more.
Uh, I do. I don't get a cramp, but I still think the Middle East is enough to drive
I
anybody
do
to
too.
distraction, as we've seen that without constant, permanent, top down leadership from the United States, this war is not going to end, and the conflict in Gaza is not going to stop, and the people of that region are not going to get the phrase I love from President Clinton, quote, the quiet miracle of a normal life that can only happen if the United States and world leaders together do the hard work of pursuing peace in the Middle East by bringing together the right people. And it doesn't matter who does the bringing together. What matters is that the
Right.
job gets done. And we have to be big enough to understand that sometimes people we object to politically, like Donald Trump or even Tony Blair, for many of the listeners, you may not like these people. And in some cases, I don't like these people. But if they're in power and they get the job done, we have to have the lucidity
Right.
to acknowledge that they're helping rather than hurting.
The quiet miracle of a normal life. I think I've internalized that so many times from you, Jamie, that I now know it off by heart, as probably many of our listeners. And it's a good line from President Clinton. And on that note, bye bye. Thanks for listening to the Q&A bonus episode of The X-Files with me and with Jamie. If you have a question for us that you want us to answer next time, you can find us on all the major social media platforms. Our handle is @AmanpourPod, or you can email us. We are amanpourpod@global.com. Our next episode is out on Tuesday, wherever you get your podcast. Remember, you can listen and watch for free on Global Player, and also we're on YouTube. Just search Christiane Amanpour Presents and subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode. Bye. Bye, Jamie. See you next time.
Bye again from New York. Goodbye.